Right now, there is a terrible disaster in Russia. Another severe plane crash, many casualties. The confrontation is escalating. Azerbaijan against the Kremlin, a powerful decision by Baku has surprised everyone. The Kremlin is in panic, shock. China is deciding the fate of the war in Ukraine, while Putin is once again running away from a meeting with Zelensky. The explosion in Sochi and Adler, Ukraine pulled off something truly incredible. No one expected such devastation. Urgently, Putin has turned his attention to the Baltics. The pseudo-empire is preparing for a new war. The ships are already at sea. Russian sabotage groups are pushing into Pokrovsk. The occupiers are paying with blood. The Ukrainian armed forces are tearing up Russia's railways. The occupiers' logistics are in ashes. Crimea is already close. A powerful Ukrainian offensive. NATO will flood Ukraine with weapons. An urgent decision. All the most powerful equipment is already on its way to Ukraine. The bunker dwellers are in a panic. Beatings, torture, brutal assaults. How Russian prisons became a factory for cannon fodder in Putin's war. All this and more coming up in our episode of Hotspot. Ships have left the ports. War in the Baltic Sea, a military mission right under the nose of the US in the Pacific Ocean. Terrifying decisions have been made. The south of Russia is on fire. Drones are blowing up Krasnodar. Explosions in Sochi and Adler. The Kremlin is in panic. A powerful response for the attack on Prevost. The Ukrainian armed forces have gotten to work. All the details are coming up in the report.
A hot night in Russia. Drones paid a visit to Krasnodar Krai. Oh, mama.
Oh, I'm quite surprised by that. What exactly is going on here?
I'm filming them. Sochi has suffered the largest attack since the start of the full-scale war. Local residents counted at least 7 explosions in the sky over Adler. About 800 passengers were stranded in airports across Siberia. The UAVs may have hit one of the railway bridges. Russian authorities also reported a strike on an oil depot on Tavricheskaya Street. While in Russia, UAVs are attacking strategic targets, in Ukraine the occupiers continue to terrorize the civilian population. At night, Putin's troops launched a massive strike on Odessa. As a result of the attack, civilian infrastructure, residential buildings and sites in the UNESCO zone were damaged. One of the enemy strike sites was the famous Prevost market in the historic center of the city. But this war is not enough for Putin, and apparently the dictator is preparing for another one. Russia has launched large-scale naval exercises involving more than 150 ships and 15,000 military personnel in the Pacific and Arctic Oceans, as well as in the Baltic and Caspian Seas.
The exercise scenario involves the defense of deployment areas and, most importantly, economic activity. In other words, the Russian Federation is making it clear that, accordingly, the Arctic is within the zone of exclusively Russian economic interests. The same situation applies to the Baltic Sea. The Russian Federation is making it clear that it will put a stop to any attempts by NATO countries' fleets to block the activities of illegal tanker vessels, the so-called shadow fleet.
Meanwhile, Turkey is strengthening its military capabilities. The defense company Roketsan has, for the first time, demonstrated its newest hypersonic ballistic missile, the Typhoon Block 4. It is stated that it can hit targets at a range of several hundred kilometers at speeds exceeding 5 Mach.
Erdogan is therefore considering concrete steps toward an independent defense. This comes against the backdrop of the United States' decision to potentially block supplies. How both air and missile defense systems, as well as accordingly the F-16 and F-35.
Ukraine will also soon receive new weapons. The US has approved the sale of 2 military aid packages to Kyiv worth $322 million. It is known that the package will include the latest air defense systems and their maintenance, as well as Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, along with their repair and technical support. And while America is publicly helping Ukraine fight the occupiers, Putin continues to secretly cooperate with Xi Jinping. China is supplying Russia with drone engines through front companies, disguising them as industrial refrigeration units, Reuters reports.
After the statement by the Chinese political leadership that the PRC will not allow the Russian Federation to be defeated in the war, we are talking about an expanded nature of cooperation, including military technical collaboration between the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex and accordingly the PRC's military-industrial complex.
Meanwhile, fierce fighting continues on the front. Russian forces have amassed reserves and are attempting to break through to Pokrovsk. Currently, combat operations are taking place in the outskirts of the city.
Madness, a slap in Aliyev's face Moscow is provoking. Azerbaijan responds harshly to the Kremlin. Putin's militants are under arrest in Baku. The bunker dweller is playing with fire. Tensions are reaching a peak. War is now very close. What is happening? Find out next.
Major General Alexei Tolopila was recently promoted. He became the deputy commander of the 11th Air Force and Air Defense Army. It was he who, in December of last year, gave the order to shoot down the airliner. The Azal flight, which was heading to Grozny, at that time, the Russian side did not admit its guilt and promoted the general who killed nearly 40 passengers on the flight.
We were explicitly told with a clear and undeniable certainty that they possessed full knowledge of the individuals responsible, stating, "We definitively know precisely who committed this act."
Meanwhile, Baku is preparing a package of documents to file a lawsuit against Russia in international courts. This was announced by the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, at a recent media forum in Shusha. At this forum, he also accepted as a gift the patches of Ukrainian armed forces units from a Ukrainian journalist and unequivocally expressed his support for Ukraine.
My answer will not differ from what I said back then. And I think this resonates with the aspirations of the Ukrainian people to never agree to occupation. That is the main advice. That is what we did.
Tensions between Putin and the Aliyevs are rising. Recently, former Wagner PMC mercenaries were arrested in Azerbaijan. Both had served sentences in Russian correctional colonies before being recruited by Wagner. Two Azerbaijanis are accused of using firearms and explosives in Ukraine.
The government arrested Wagner PMC fighters who fought on Russia's side in Ukraine, making them the most direct target for the Kremlin's most dangerous organization. This is a bold move that not only rejects Russian influence in the South Caucasus, but also actively begins to dismantle the entire post-Soviet system, the Moscow authorities. This is the first time a post-Soviet country has held its citizens accountable for joining the Wagner PMC.
The Kremlin is already openly issuing threats toward Azerbaijan over their actions. Senator Karasin, who was formerly Lavrov's deputy, is hinting at the hand of the damned West.
The West continues to systematically surround Russia along the perimeter of our borders with the hostility of neighboring states, former brotherly Soviet republics. Long-term schemes laid down decades ago are now coming into play. New twists are unfolding with our Caucasian neighbors Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's quite obvious where the scenario planning for such developments is coming from. We won't offend anyone, but those in the centers coordinating actions hostile to Russia should understand that the game has become dangerous. This is playing with fire, with consequences that are hard to predict not only for the region, but now for the global community as a whole.
This video comes from one of the Z channels where Kremlin bloggers complained that during a lesson in the Russian city of Derbent, children are singing in Azerbaijani. And even though Russia is officially a multinational country, singing songs about being Azerbaijani is unacceptable. Someone must be held responsible for this.
What kind of school curriculum is this, where children living in Russia declare, "Our homeland is Azerbaijan"? Are we raising agents of a neighboring state in Russia? We demand the immediate removal of portraits of the Aliyevs. Identify and punish those responsible, and thoroughly review all such educational activities in schools. Derbent.
In Baku, they are prepared for an escalation of the conflict and are not afraid of threats from the Kremlin. Moreover, they are ready to respond sharply to any provocations.
Today, Azerbaijan's military machine is so strong that we could sweep away everything Russia has in the North Caucasus in an instant. I don't want to boast about this, but that's the reality. Azerbaijan Baku has an air defense system. Its top power are Israeli, Turkish, and Russian systems, the very latest S-300 modifications. We will protect our capital. So what threat do they pose to us? Well, yes, there's the Caspian flotilla. They could perhaps fire some caliber missiles towards Azerbaijan. But after that, this flotilla would no longer exist on the Caspian Sea.
Recently, the Minister of Defense of Azerbaijan met with the Minister of Defense of Turkey in Istanbul. As a result of the meeting, the two countries signed an agreement to strengthen mutual military security. Azerbaijan also signed a contract with Baykar for the purchase of weapons and logistical support. Aliyev is constantly irritating the Kremlin, and Russia can't do anything about it.
A tragedy in the skies over Russia. 49 people have died. The Kremlin is saving money at the expense of lives for the sake of war. The West is in shock. The keys to peace in Ukraine are with China, not the US. Is the sea the main peacemaker or the puppet master of war? What is behind the negotiations between Beijing and the EU? Zelensky has challenged Putin, saying he's ready to meet even tomorrow. But the Kremlin is dodging again. All the details are in the report.
On the 23rd of July, the third round of negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations took place. There was no real breakthrough. Yes, and the meeting lasted less than an hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin even tomorrow. During the negotiations, Rustem Umerov proposed to the Russians to organize a meeting of the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the US by the end of August.
This is a standing offer that can be implemented at any moment. If Putin says tomorrow I am ready to meet with President Zelensky would be ready to meet tomorrow. I think that is the answer to your question about the final date.
Nevertheless, the Russian side, as always, is stalling. According to Zelensky, in order for the meeting to take place, the terms of the agreement need to be worked out and topics for discussion by the leaders need to be prepared. What does that mean?
No, of course, such a meeting is not being planned because it needs to be thoroughly prepared since, let's say, the positions of the memorandums of Ukraine and Russia that have been made public are far too out of sync. The Russian side and Putin himself find countless reasons, of course, not to attend such a leaders' meeting and not to meet directly with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, which is absolutely obvious.
Meanwhile, Russia continues to lose its influence. Azerbaijan has distanced itself, and now even Armenia has turned its back on Russia by organizing a bilateral meeting without the Kremlin's participation.
Do they want to take a tougher stance towards the Russian Federation? Of course, yes. Do they want to be able to better protect the interests of the citizens or ethnic Azerbaijanis living in the Russian Federation? Absolutely, yes. Azerbaijan and President Aliyev himself will implement this through his ties and strategic partnership with Turkey. And of course, through the fact that the Silk Road is now being actively developed, that is the overland connection between China and Europe.
Apparently, against the backdrop of the conflict with Azerbaijanis, the Russian authorities have effectively started a hunt even against ethnic Russians themselves. In the Chelyabinsk region, officials have declared the Russian community extremist without trial or any grounds. Now people are being threatened with prosecution.
I urge everyone to join the Russian community where brotherhood and mutual assistance prevail.
Is China really in charge of everything now? On the 23rd of July, Xi Jinping met with the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission in Beijing, supposedly to establish stability under the current circumstances.
Is China interested in having Russia serve as a big scarecrow for Europe? Yes, they are interested as well. In fact, I'll go even further. Even the United States, in the person of Trump, as we can already see from this configuration, partially finds this situation acceptable too. Because only this fear in Europe of a direct attack or escalation from the Russian Federation has raised NATO membership contributions to 5%. And Europe is ready to pay for armaments not only for itself, but also for Ukraine, thereby boosting the American economy.
Well, it's story time now. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, known for her support of Trump and anti-Ukrainian statements, spread a fake story about protests in Kyiv. According to her, people supposedly took to the streets against President Zelensky.
Mass protests are taking place in Kyiv against the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, who is a dictator and refuses to sign a peace agreement and end the war. I thank the Ukrainian people. Remove him from office. And America should stop funding and sending weapons.
Of course, the rallies in many Ukrainian cities have nothing to do with calls for capitulation. But for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's a convenient excuse to pass off wishful thinking as reality. But could this fake be dangerous for Ukraine?
I think it's obvious to many, and in fact, the main intelligence directorate wrote about this officially, that the Russian Federation is already preparing to use this methodology of peaceful protests for its own purposes. So, will different sides use these already created images, or will they create their own images tomorrow to achieve their political goals? And not just political goals. Well, of course, yes, the Pandora's box has been opened.
And now, briefly about the magic of Russian politics. The other day, a State Duma deputy from United Russia managed to vote on 11 draft laws. And that would be nothing special. But the problem is that at the same session, they officially announced his death.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Pokrovsk is on the brink. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups are breaking into the city. The Ukrainian armed forces are responding harshly. Ukraine is holding key frontline positions and preparing for an offensive. The occupiers' logistics have been shattered. Crimeans are already at the starting line. The bunker dweller is learning everything in real time.
4,000 shellings and more than 130 attempts to storm the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia is advancing in some sectors of the front, but the defense forces are holding all key directions. What is happening on the front today, and why is the Kremlin sending suicide squads to Pokrovsk? Over 60 times in the past day, the Russians have tried to break through into Pokrovsk. According to preliminary estimates, more than 200 people were eliminated in these assaults.
The situation is very difficult because the enemy is desperately trying to achieve the maximum result with the forces and means they have. And at the same time, which is also a particular cause for concern, the enemy is advancing eastward toward Konstantinivka, moving in the direction of Popov Yar and Rusin Yar. This indicates that the enemy is putting the maximum of its resources and combat potential into this offensive push. And in order to hold them back, well, we need to show exceptional resilience and exert every bit of our available resources.
At the same time, one of the enemy's sabotage and reconnaissance groups caused quite a stir in the press. It is known that 3 groups in armored vehicles managed to reach the outskirts of the city. It is reported that the sabotage and reconnaissance group was detected, partially destroyed, and those who survived were taken prisoner. Also, according to analysts, there was no real expectation of success since the group had virtually no artillery or drone support. They were, as they say, taking a chance, but fortunately, luck was on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces.
They can't really cause any significant harm. So they start some skirmishes, shell the positions of the defending troops, that is, the armed forces of Ukrainian, try to create try to sow panic, try to bring chaos into the defensive lines, and accordingly must be eliminated. These are basically, the people in these groups are essentially suicide squads, because once they end up in the city, this group inevitably gets surrounded. And their fate is grim.
In southern Ukraine, the occupiers have achieved minor success near Malotokmashka in the Zaporizhia region. Meanwhile, in the Kherson region, Russian assaults have only resulted in losses for the Russians. At the same time, experts say that Moscow has been preparing reserves in the occupied south for a long time, and in the near future it will become clear in which direction they intend to use them.
This week, we are specifically expecting redeployment, which will show what the Russians are preparing for. In other words, they now have to withdraw these resources and their units that are stationed there after finishing preparations and move them to the front line. They don't move them very far. It could be either Zaporizhia or the north of Donetsk region. In fact, what interests us most is which point and where they will focus their maximum efforts.
Recently, the Sumy direction has also become more active. There, as usual, the main fighting is for the settlement of Vovchansk.
At this moment, the enemy is taking advantage of the fact that there is a nature reserve here, and also making use of the wide forest belts and mixed forests, where it's very difficult to observe movements. That's why the enemy is trying to do everything possible on the outskirts of Vovchansk, on the city's periphery, to advance specifically through the forested areas. But again, the defense forces are working to block the enemy. There has been no significant success on the battlefield.
The Russian advance has also stalled near the village of Milov. According to Russian propaganda, a second front was supposed to open there in the Kharkiv region almost effortlessly. However, according to the Ukrainian armed forces, the enemy has not achieved any success for a week now, only pointlessly losing soldiers in attempts to advance.
They have been drawn into a pocket that is currently the most comfortable for our defense, and systematic work is being carried out to destroy the enemy. He cannot expand this bridgehead.
Our command also reports that, in addition to direct fighting on the front line, Ukraine has also succeeded in operations behind enemy lines. Clearly, after assessing how much and what kind of supplies the Russians are bringing to the front, a solution was found so that if these supplies don't remain in Russia, at least they move much more slowly. And that solution is strikes on the railway.
This is logistics, this is the delivery of the necessary resources. And the strikes are quite serious. And right now, we're waiting for good news from Novocherkassk for a reason. Because the railway has always been a priority for the Russians in building their military logistics. This logistics of the North Caucasus Railway is specifically directed at this section of the front. That is, this is the southern part of the front for the Russians, and it is where they are transferring the necessary resources to the Donetsk region. This also includes the Pokrovsk direction.
At the same time, against the backdrop of recent insider reports about the conversation between Trump and Zelensky, the idea that the Ukrainian armed forces will soon go on the offensive does not seem unfounded. This is already being openly discussed in the Russian State Duma, and according to experts in the General Staff, such a scenario is quite realistically being considered already this year.
Ukraine is considering the issue of preparing offensive operations. This is not a counter-offensive, but an offensive that should lead to the defeat of the enemy on the southern front and the subsequent loss of Crimea.
If Ukrainian defense forces reach the coast of the Sea of Azov, well, the fate of Crimea will be decided within 2 or 3 months. These are obvious facts. No matter how strange that may sound today, but we are thinking about it.
At the same time, of course, no one is officially talking about an offensive. The Ukrainian command has corrected its mistakes, and now Russia learns about both the direction of the strike and its start in real time.
The hellish contract is a real hell for Russians. Torture and death instead of freedom. Parole has been cancelled. Only cannon fodder for the front. Prisoners in Russia are left with no choice. The Russian prison has become the Kremlin's magic wand for waging wars. How convicts are forced to die for Putin watch right now.
Russian convicts are being recruited for the war in Ukraine through brutal beatings and torture. Relatives of the prisoners themselves reported this to the publication Sibir, rarely on condition of anonymity. It's no secret to anyone that penal colonies have become a magic wand for the Russian Ministry of Defense. The practice of recruiting for private military companies was started by the now deceased Yevgeny Prigozhin.
No one ever retreats, and no one ever surrenders.
Journalists have calculated that he managed to recruit about 50,000 prisoners. Out of 20,000 mercenaries killed near Bakhmut, 17,000 were former convicts. In 2023, the Federal Penitentiary Service reported that the number of prisoners that year decreased by a record 58,000 people. To ensure the flow of those willing to trade their prison bunks for the trenches did not dwindle, the Russian government acted quickly and adjusted the laws to meet the needs of the Ministry of Defense. Since October 2024, it has become possible to sign a contract even at the stage of court proceedings, that is, before a verdict is delivered. This way, investigators manage not to burden the penal colonies and ensure the steady flow of participants for the meat grinder assaults.
A contract soldier because of his service.
What did you choose, to serve your sentence or to go to war?
To serve my sentence.
The commander said you'd be going on a motorcycle. I said, how am I supposed to ride the motorcycle? The last time I rode one was 2 or 3 years ago. He was already getting in touch with the commander through WhatsApp with me. He'll learn by the time he gets there.
I ended up there for fighting with the police. I signed the contract on the 18th of December 2024. They didn't really ask me. I signed, well, they said they'd clear my record. And In a year, I'd be completely free. Life will start with a clean slate. The scariest thing in war is when your own guys shoot themselves. No one knows why or what for, and the headless ones lying there without a head. Idiots. You'd be better off just serving your time and not rushing anywhere. There's nothing good here, and it's not like it's covered in honey.
There's no more honey in the war in Ukraine, but there are fewer convicts now. The system keeps churning out political prisoners, but you can't recruit them. For a year now, the media has been reporting that it's simply impossible for inmates to get out on parole. There's only one option, a contract. And now his relatives say they're forcing him to sign it.
They opened the gates and hundreds of riot police stormed into the colony and started beating everyone indiscriminately. If you so much as raised your hand, they'd accuse you of resisting. They just beat the whole colony with batons along the spines, and nearly half of them, some with broken bones, were taken straight to the front. Some people signed contracts right there, and some were taken to Moscow. And on the way, they'd say, well, when we get to Lefortovo, we'll cut your ears off. He signs the contract right away. They communicate this all over the region. Of course, this kind of thing is happening in every colony in the region. Well, if even in such a light colony where every act of violence happened for some actual reason, you can imagine what goes on in the high security or special regime colonies.
Journalists report that the situation in the colonies of the Volga region is not much different from that in the Tula region.
On Friday, the FSIN, OMON, FSB, and even the regional FSIN from a neighboring region arrived. About 100 people. They beat everyone indiscriminately and immediately took 15 non-Russians for contracts. Half of them were taken to Lefortovo. On the way, they threatened to charge them with extremism if they didn't sign the contract. All week, Russians have been beaten one by one. They are summoned to the authorities, their phones are taken away. If you refuse to sign the contract, they beat you. After that, squad after squad is closed down because of the prisoners who have left. There are about 10 left now.
The Russian prison has become dictator Putin's magic wand. Thousands of convicts who don't need to be paid enlistment bonuses can be easily sent to their deaths without worrying about funeral expenses. Russian military aggression has allowed Russians not only to satisfy their imperial ambitions, but also to conveniently get rid of social deadweight.
The weapon of the future is already in Ukraine. Putin is in a panic while NATO is testing 22nd century technologies. New weapons are changing everything. Western countries are lining up. The Kremlin is screaming, Ukraine is changing the rules of war. Lethal technologies leave no chance. Explosive details coming up in the report.
Tested in Ukraine. Weapons without this label, it seems, will soon no longer be valued in the West. After all, when the largest war since World War II is raging in Europe, laboratory testing has lost its meaning. Now, any development can be tested directly on the battlefield. The prominent defense cluster, Brave One, has officially announced the significant launch of a groundbreaking program specifically allowing foreign arms manufacturers to thoroughly test their very latest technological developments directly on the challenging front lines. Companies will diligently send their innovative products to Ukraine, conduct comprehensive online training sessions on precisely how to effectively use them, and then patiently wait for Ukrainian troops to thoroughly test them and subsequently send back detailed reports.
A large number of private companies that are now engaged in armaments and weapons production have made a significant contribution in this area. And now there is a critical need to coordinate interaction between these companies. Thanks to these kinds of testing grounds, we can say that interaction will take place and there will be more collaborations.
And this will make it possible to create joint products that will work more efficiently.
First and foremost, we're talking about unmanned systems, electronic warfare complexes, and also missile systems.
This drone has already laid more than 180 mines and has performed quite well. And as you can see, it has returned. Amongst the other drones you've seen, there are kamikaze drones. Basically, it's universal. It can be used as a kamikaze drone and for delivering cargo, especially small loads.
According to the Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov, such an influx of partners and the mass deployment of equipment for testing in Ukraine will help find solutions faster, ultimately changing the course of the war.
The ongoing armed conflict is currently in a highly acute phase, which critically gives corporations the significant opportunity to thoroughly test their advanced weapons systems in real challenging combat conditions. Most of these advanced technologies primarily involve unmanned aerial vehicles, commonly known as drones, their sophisticated control systems, the comprehensive processing of the vital intelligence they meticulously gather, as well as various effective means of precisely detecting and actively countering these aerial threats, mainly through advanced electronic warfare techniques, but also utilizing robust air defense systems.
At the same time, experts say the Test in Ukraine program not only allows for testing developments on the battlefield, but also helps to understand how Western weapons perform against the countermeasures of a potential adversary. After all, Russia has been officially recognized at the NATO level as one of the main threats to the alliance.
This provides them with the significant and undeniable advantages, the invaluable opportunity to thoroughly test their ongoing developments against the formidable Russian army, to meticulously study and analyze Russian defensive systems, and to effectively adapt their advanced weapons to precisely counter the sophisticated technologies that Russia currently employs on the battlefield, and quite possibly those that China may also utilize in the foreseeable future.
Participants in the program also have the opportunity to test their developments not only at the front, but deep behind Russian lines, if we are talking about long-range systems. Here we see both counteraction against Russian electronic warfare systems and the ability to identify targets using artificial intelligence, as well as the direct capability to destroy the intended target.
Such capabilities exist. Right now, they are mainly being implemented with the help of long-range drones. A wide variety of factories are being hit, ones that are critical for the military and the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation.
In addition, manufacturers will be able to test their products directly on site, that is, by coming to Ukraine themselves. This will allow for real-time modifications. There is also the option to entrust testing to Brave One specialists. In that case, the experts will conduct the testing themselves and provide partners with a detailed report of the results. And this work is already underway, particularly in the field of UAVs.
Many of these drones, as I understand it, are classified. For example, there's Vibet, as well as Vector. Both are used for reconnaissance, surveillance, and data collection. This conflict is the perfect testing ground for weapons.
In an interview with Reuters, Artem Moroz, head of investor relations at Brave One, said that many companies have already shown interest in the Test in Ukraine program. Naturally, without going into details, so who and what exactly is planning to test in Ukraine, Russia will find out in real time.
That's all for now. And for more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.